Hey guys, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it, thanks. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a chilling new story when it drops. The first thing Jack noticed was the cold, sharp and biting, more intense than anything he'd ever felt. He opened his eyes, and the vast canopy of stars stared back at him, their light fractured by the silhouettes of towering pines. Jack blinked hard, confusion gripping him like a vice. He was lying on damp earth, the smell of moss and decay thick in his nostrils. A low breeze swept through the forest, rustling branches like whispers exchanged among unseen watchers. He pushed himself upright, his breath visible in the frigid air. His muscles ached, and his palms stung as he brushed dirt and pine needles from his hands. A quick glance around revealed nothing but endless trees. The silence was unnatural. No chirping insects, no distant calls of nocturnal animals, just the faint hum of the wind. Jack's heart raced. The last thing he remembered was sitting around a campfire with his friends. They'd been laughing, toasting marshmallows, and trading ghost stories. He tried to recall details, but his mind was a blur. How had he gotten here? Why was he alone? As he rose to his feet, his foot nudged something soft. He looked down and saw a deflated pool float, its shark-shaped form sagging pitifully against the ground. Jack frowned. It was completely out of place, a glaring anomaly in the natural setting. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. There was no explanation for its presence, just like there was no explanation for his. A flutter of movement caught his eye. Something was pinned to the bark of a nearby tree. Jack approached cautiously, the sound of his own footsteps unnervingly loud in the quiet. It was a piece of paper, weathered and torn, held in place by a rusted nail. Written on it in messy, uneven handwriting were the words, "Come find us." Below the message was his name, scrawled in shaky letters. His stomach dropped. The handwriting was eerily familiar, his own, but he didn't remember writing it. His hands trembled as he pulled the note from the tree, the edges disintegrating between his fingers. He checked his pockets for his phone, a flashlight, anything, but found only more questions. His belongings were gone. He spun in a slow circle, scanning the forest for any sign of his friends. "Hello," he called, his voice echoing strangely, as if the trees themselves swallowed the sound. "Is anyone out there?" No answer, only the wind. Jack took a deep breath and forced himself to think logically. He'd probably wandered off in his sleep, maybe sleepwalking after one too many beers. That had to be it. He'd find his way back to the campsite, and his friends would be there, teasing him for getting lost. But as he picked a direction and began walking, a heavy sense of dread settled over him. The forest didn't feel right. The trees loomed closer together the farther he went, their gnarled branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. Every step felt like a violation, as if he were trespassing in a place not meant for him. He kept walking for what felt like hours, his pace slowing as exhaustion set in. Just as he considered stopping to rest, his foot caught on something, sending him sprawling. He groaned, pulling himself upright and turning to see what had tripped him. It was another note, partially buried in the dirt. Jack's stomach churned as he picked it up. The words were smudged but legible. "We're not far. Hurry." This time the handwriting wasn't his. 2 days earlier, Jack had been standing on the edge of a sun-drenched trailhead, staring up at the vast expanse of wilderness before him. The Sierra National Forest stretched as far as the eye could see, a tapestry of rugged peaks and deep valleys. His friends were already unloading gear from the car, their voices filled with the excitement that comes with escaping the grind of daily life. "Last chance to back out, Jack," Emma teased, slinging a heavy backpack over her shoulder. Her auburn hair gleamed in the sunlight, and her easy smile hinted at how much she enjoyed ribbing him. Jack smirked, adjusting the straps of his own pack. "And miss all this? No way." "You say that now," Chris chimed in as he wrestled with a tent bag. "But wait until the second night when we're eating instant noodles and you're wishing for Wi-Fi." "I'm just here for the campfire s'mores," Beth added with a grin. She was the smallest of the group, but carried the most enthusiasm, bounding ahead on the trail like an overexcited puppy. Jack wasn't a camping enthusiast, but he enjoyed the camaraderie. It had been Emma's idea, a way to celebrate Beth's recent promotion and disconnect from technology for a weekend. Jack, Emma, Chris, and Beth had been friends since college, their bond weathering the years despite their diverging lives. They'd spent countless nights in apartments and dive bars together, but this was their first time venturing into the wilderness as a group. The hike to the campsite was challenging but rewarding. The trail wound through dense forest, crossed over sparkling streams, and opened up to breathtaking vistas. The group laughed and joked as they climbed, their voices echoing through the trees. By the time they reached their destination, a secluded clearing beside a glacial lake, they were sweaty and tired, but exhilarated. "This is perfect," Emma said, dropping her pack with a satisfied sigh. The lake shimmered under the afternoon sun, framed by towering pines and granite cliffs. They set up camp quickly, pitching their tents in a loose circle and gathering wood for a fire. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but he chalked it up to nerves. The forest had a way of amplifying every creak and rustle, and he wasn't used to being so far from civilization. That night they sat around the campfire, the flames casting flickering shadows on their faces. Chris produced a flask of whiskey, which they passed around as the stars emerged in the inky sky. Laughter filled the clearing as they swapped embarrassing stories and recounted their favorite college antics. As the fire burned low, the conversation turned to ghost stories. Beth was the first to share, her eyes wide as she described the urban legend of the Goat Man, a cryptid said to stalk campers in remote areas, mimicking their voices to lure them away from safety. Emma followed with a tale about hikers disappearing in the Appalachian wilderness, their bodies later found miles from their last known location, their faces frozen in terror. Jack didn't contribute. He'd never been one for scary stories, preferring logic and reason to the supernatural. But as the others spoke, he couldn't ignore the prickling at the back of his neck, the way the forest seemed to grow darker and more oppressive beyond the firelight. Eventually, Beth yawned and declared it was time for bed. One by one, the group retreated to their tents, the warmth of the fire replaced by the chill of the night. Jack lay on his sleeping pad, staring at the nylon ceiling of his tent. The rhythmic chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl should have been comforting, but he couldn't shake the sense that something was off. Just as he was drifting off to sleep, he thought he heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, and unnervingly close. He froze, straining his ears, but the sound was gone as quickly as it had come. It was probably one of his friends heading to the bushes, he told himself. Still, sleep didn't come easily. The morning sun filtered through the trees, warming the forest floor and banishing the eerie sensations of the previous night. Jack stepped out of his tent, stretching as the fresh air filled his lungs. Emma was already up, crouched near the fire pit, coaxing flames from the embers. Beth was still in her tent, and Chris was perched on a log, munching on a granola bar. "Sleep okay?" Chris asked, tossing Jack a bar. Jack caught it and nodded, though he wasn't entirely truthful. "Yeah, no complaints." After a quick breakfast, they packed light and decided to explore the area around the lake. The trail leading away from the campsite was faint, more of a suggestion than a path, and they followed it eagerly. As they climbed a small ridge, the view opened up to reveal the lake's far shore, a serene and untouched landscape of rock and water. The group marveled at its beauty, snapping photos and skipping stones. About an hour into their hike, Beth stopped abruptly. "Did you guys see that?" she asked, her voice tinged with excitement. "See what?" Emma asked, stepping beside her. Beth pointed to a break in the trees ahead. "There's something over there. It looked like a tarp or something." The group moved cautiously toward the area Beth had indicated. As they pushed through the underbrush, they came upon an old campsite, abandoned and in ruins. A tattered tarp hung limply from a tree, its faded blue fabric fluttering in the breeze. Nearby, the rusted frame of a portable stove lay half buried in dirt, alongside a scattering of utensils and unidentifiable debris. "This is creepy," Emma muttered, glancing around. Chris knelt beside the remains of a campfire, poking at the charred logs. "This stuff's ancient. Look at this. Probably been here for years." Jack walked toward a cluster of overturned coolers and gear, his curiosity growing. As he knelt to examine a discarded hiking boot, something caught his eye, a Polaroid photo lying face down in the dirt. He picked it up and turned it over, his breath hitched. The photo showed a group of people standing in front of a campfire, their faces partially obscured by shadows. Jack's attention zeroed in on the figure at the far right, tall, with short dark hair and a familiar jacket. It was unmistakably him. "What is it?" Emma asked, noticing his expression. Jack hesitated, then handed her the photo. She frowned as she studied it. "Wait, is this—" "Me," Jack finished, his voice tight. "But I've never been here before." "Okay, that's weird," Chris said, standing. "Like, really weird. Are you sure you didn't—" "I'm sure," Jack interrupted, frustration creeping into his tone. "I've never been to this campsite in my life." The group exchanged uneasy glances. "Let's just keep going," Beth said, her earlier excitement replaced by a nervous edge. "This place is giving me the creeps." They left the abandoned camp behind, but the mood had shifted. Even Chris, usually the skeptic, seemed unsettled. Jack couldn't stop thinking about the photo. It was old, yellowed and frayed around the edges, but the resemblance to him was undeniable. As they continued hiking, the forest seemed to grow darker, the canopy thickening overhead. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground, and every sound, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, felt amplified. When they reached the top of a ridge, the group stopped to catch their breath. The view below was stunning, rolling hills blanketed in forest, with the glint of the lake in the distance. But Jack barely noticed. His mind was consumed by the image in the Polaroid. "Do you think someone's messing with us?" Beth asked, breaking the silence. Emma shook her head. "How could they? We just got here." Jack didn't respond. He didn't want to admit the thought swirling in his head, that whoever had left the photo wasn't just someone. They were still out there, watching. By the time the group returned to their campsite, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the clearing. The forest seemed quieter than it had earlier in the day, and even the familiar sound of the lake's gentle lapping against the shore felt subdued. They moved quickly, gathering wood for the fire and preparing a simple dinner of instant noodles and trail mix. Jack couldn't shake the unease that had been growing since they found the Polaroid. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking at the edge of the trees. He didn't say anything, though. The last thing he wanted was to come off as paranoid, especially when he wasn't sure what he'd seen or felt. As the fire crackled to life, the group tried to recapture their earlier enthusiasm. Beth recounted a funny story about a disastrous hiking trip she'd taken with her older brother, and Emma chimed in with her own tales of clumsy outdoor adventures. Even Chris, who rarely let his guard down, seemed more relaxed as they shared laughter under the canopy of stars. But Jack couldn't join in. His eyes kept drifting toward the darkness beyond the firelight. The forest seemed alive, not with the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures, but with something quieter, something watching. He clenched his hands into fists, willing himself to stay calm. "It's just the woods," he told himself, "just your imagination." As the night wore on, the group's energy dwindled. Chris and Beth retreated to their tents first, leaving Jack and Emma by the fire. She was poking at the embers with a stick, her face thoughtful. "You've been quiet tonight," Emma said, not looking up. Jack hesitated, then sighed. "I just can't stop thinking about that Polaroid. It doesn't make sense." Emma nodded. "Yeah, it's weird, but maybe it's just some crazy coincidence, like maybe it's someone who looks like you." "Maybe," Jack said, though he didn't believe it. They sat in silence for a while, the firelight dancing across their faces. Then Emma stood, stretching. "I'm going to call it a night. Don't stay up too late." Jack watched her disappear into her tent. then turned his attention back to the fire. He added another log, the flames flaring brightly for a moment before settling back into a steady crackle. The warmth was comforting, but the sense of unease lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. As he sat there staring into the fire, a sound cut through the quiet. It was faint at first, barely audible over the crackling flames, a rhythmic, almost deliberate rustling in the underbrush. Jack froze, his heart pounding. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to circle the campsite. He grabbed the flashlight lying next to him and stood, sweeping the beam across the trees. "Hello," he called, his voice trembling slightly. "Who's there?" No response, just the rustling, steady and unrelenting. Jack's grip on the flashlight tightened. He took a step toward the edge of the clearing, his heart hammering in his chest. "This isn't funny," he said, louder this time. "Show yourself." The rustling stopped. Jack held his breath, straining to hear any other sounds. The silence pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, he let out a shaky breath and turned back toward the fire. And then he saw it. Just beyond the firelight, at the edge of the clearing, a figure stood motionless. It was barely more than a shadow, its outline indistinct but unmistakably human. Jack's blood ran cold. He took a step back, raising the flashlight to shine it at the figure. But there was nothing there, just trees and darkness. "Jack?" He nearly jumped out of his skin at the sound of Emma's voice. She was standing just outside her tent, rubbing her eyes. "What's going on?" she asked groggily. Jack opened his mouth to explain, but stopped. What could he say? That he thought he'd seen someone, but now they were gone? He shook his head. "Nothing. Just thought I heard something." Emma frowned but didn't press him. "Come to bed. You're freaking yourself out." Jack nodded, though he knew sleep wouldn't come easily. As he crawled into his tent, he couldn't shake the image of the figure at the edge of the clearing. And he couldn't help but feel that it was still out there, waiting. Morning arrived, shrouded in mist, the air damp and heavy. Jack awoke to the sound of hushed voices outside his tent. He unzipped the flap and stepped out, greeted by Emma and Chris sitting near the extinguished fire pit. Beth was pacing near the lake, her arms crossed tightly. "What's going on?" Jack asked, his voice still thick with sleep. Emma looked up, her expression tight. "Beth thought she heard something last night. Footsteps, close to her tent." Jack's stomach sank. "Did you see anything?" Beth stopped pacing and shook her head. "No. When I looked, there was nothing there. But I know I heard it. It was deliberate, you know, not just an animal." Chris sighed, rubbing his temples. "Probably just a raccoon or something. Let's not freak ourselves out." Jack didn't say anything. He didn't want to add to the tension, but he knew what he'd seen, or thought he'd seen, the night before. "Maybe we should stick together today," he said finally. "No splitting up." "Agreed," Emma said. "Let's just get out and hike. Maybe some daylight will make us all feel better." They packed up a small bag of essentials and set out along a trail that skirted the edge of the lake. The mist clung stubbornly to the forest, muffling their footsteps and turning the world into an eerie, dreamlike landscape. Jack kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see the shadowy figure again. The group didn't speak much, their earlier camaraderie replaced by a heavy silence. Even Chris seemed subdued, his usual sarcastic remarks conspicuously absent. After about an hour of walking, they came to a fork in the trail. One path led uphill, winding through dense trees, while the other descended into a shallow valley. "Which way?" Beth asked, her voice unusually quiet. "Downhill," Chris said, pointing. "We haven't explored that area yet." Reluctantly, they followed him down the sloping trail. The trees grew thicker as they descended, their branches intertwining overhead to form a natural canopy. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, until it felt as though they were walking into another world entirely. Jack was the first to notice the smell. It was faint at first, but as they went deeper into the valley, it became stronger, cloying and sickly sweet, like rotting meat. "What the hell is that?" Emma muttered, covering her nose with her sleeve. The group slowed, their unease mounting with every step. The smell grew stronger until it was nearly unbearable. Then the trail opened up into a small clearing, and they saw it. A sinkhole. It yawned in the center of the clearing, a jagged tear in the earth. The edges were overgrown with weeds and tangled roots, but the bottom was visible. A pit filled with discarded belongings. Backpacks, sleeping bags, and clothing lay scattered like the remnants of a campsite. But it was the other objects that made Jack's skin crawl. Animal bones, half buried in the dirt, their yellowed surfaces gnawed and splintered. "What is this place?" Beth whispered, her voice trembling. Jack stepped closer to the edge, his heart pounding. He could see old camping gear tangled with the bones, torn tents, rusted stoves, and a collapsed folding chair. But it was the Polaroids that caught his attention. They were scattered across the bottom of the sinkhole, some half buried in the dirt, others fluttering in the faint breeze. He squinted, his breath hitching as he realized they were all pictures of people, campers, hikers, and him. "Oh my God," Emma said, taking a step back. "We need to leave, now." Chris, usually the calmest of the group, nodded. "Yeah, this is messed up." As they turned to go, Jack's foot slipped on the loose dirt at the edge of the sinkhole, sending a small cascade of debris tumbling into the pit. The sound echoed unnaturally, amplified by the hollow space below. He froze, his eyes darting to the shadows at the bottom. Something moved. It was subtle at first, a flicker of motion among the debris. But then it grew, a dark shape slithering and rising, unfolding with unnatural grace. Jack's breath caught in his throat as two glinting eyes emerged from the shadows, locking onto him. "Run," he whispered. The group didn't need to be told twice. They bolted back up the trail, the forest seeming to close in around them as they fled. Jack didn't dare look back, but he could hear it. The sound of something climbing out of the sinkhole, something large and impossibly fast. By the time they reached the fork in the trail, the sound was gone. But the forest felt different, heavier. Jack leaned against a tree, trying to catch his breath, his mind racing. "What the hell was that?" Beth gasped, clutching Emma's arm. Jack didn't answer. He didn't know. The group trudged back to camp in silence, each step weighed down by a growing sense of dread. No one spoke about the thing they had seen, or thought they'd seen, emerging from the sinkhole. The forest felt oppressive now, the air thick and suffocating. Every crackle of leaves or snap of a twig set their nerves on edge. When they reached the clearing, Beth immediately collapsed onto a log near the fire pit, burying her face in her hands. "This trip was a mistake," she muttered. "We should have never come here." Chris paced near the tents, his face drawn and pale. "That thing, whatever it was, isn't normal. We need to pack up and leave, tonight." "It's too late," Emma said, gesturing to the horizon. The sun was already sinking below the trees, the sky streaked with hues of deep orange and purple. "We'd never make it out before dark." "Then we leave first thing in the morning," Jack said firmly. "We'll stick together, stay near the fire, and just get through tonight." The others nodded reluctantly, though no one looked convinced. They ate a quiet dinner of granola bars and jerky, the usual banter replaced by tense glances at the forest. Jack tried to stay calm, but his mind kept replaying the image of those glowing eyes at the bottom of the sinkhole. What had it been? And why had the Polaroids been there? Why had his face been among them? The fire burned low, its crackling the only sound in the clearing. One by one the group retreated to their tents, each armed with a flashlight, and the promise to call out at the first sign of trouble. Jack lay on his sleeping pad, his hunting knife clutched tightly in one hand. He didn't think it would do much against whatever was out there, but it was better than nothing. The forest was eerily silent, as if holding its breath. Jack tried to keep his breathing steady, but his senses were on high alert, every muscle in his body tense. He wasn't sure when he finally drifted off, but when he awoke, it was to the sound of rustling. At first he thought it was just the wind, but as he listened, he realized the noise was deliberate. Soft footsteps crunching over fallen leaves. He bolted upright, his heart racing. The sound was moving past his tent toward the others. "Guys," he whispered. but there was no response. He unzipped his tent slowly, gripping the knife tightly as he peered out. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long, flickering shadows across the clearing. Jack's eyes darted to Emma's tent, then Chris's. Both were still zipped shut, but Beth's tent flap was wide open. "Beth?" Jack crawled out of his tent, his voice louder this time. "Where are you?" No answer. He moved toward her tent, the knife trembling in his hand. Inside, her sleeping bag was empty, crumpled as if she had left in a hurry. Her boots were gone, but her flashlight was still there, lying on its side and casting a weak beam across the nylon floor. "Beth!" Jack shouted now, waking the others. Emma and Chris stumbled out of their tents, their faces alarmed. "What's going on?" Emma asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Beth's gone," Jack said, his chest tight. "She's not in her tent." Chris swore under his breath. "Maybe she just went to pee or something." "She would have taken her flashlight," Jack said, shaking his head. "And I heard footsteps. She didn't just wander off." Emma grabbed her own flashlight and swept the beam across the clearing. "Beth," she called, her voice echoing into the forest. "Where are you?" The only answer was the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Jack's throat tightened. "We need to find her." Chris hesitated. What if that thing from the sinkhole?" "Don't," Emma snapped, her voice trembling. "Don't say it." Jack ignored them and stepped toward the tree line, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam caught a faint impression in the dirt, a trail of footprints leading into the woods. They were small, unmistakably Beth's, but something about them made Jack's skin crawl. The steps were erratic, as if she'd been running or dragged. "Here," Jack said, motioning to the others. "She went this way." Chris grabbed a branch from the fire, its smoldering tip casting weak light as they followed the trail. The forest seemed darker now, the air colder. The footprints led deeper into the trees, winding through dense underbrush and over uneven terrain. Every so often the group stopped to call out for Beth, but the only response was the rustling of leaves. After what felt like an eternity, the trail ended abruptly. The footprints disappeared, replaced by a patch of disturbed earth. Jack shone his flashlight over the ground, his stomach sinking. In the center of the clearing lay Beth's boot, one of its laces snapped and trailing into the dirt. "She wouldn't have left this," Emma whispered, her voice shaking. Jack crouched beside the boot, his mind racing. There were no other tracks, no sign of where she had gone or what had taken her. But as he reached for the boot, he noticed something else, a Polaroid lying half buried in the dirt. His hands trembled as he picked it up. It was a picture of Beth, taken from the edge of the campsite. She was smiling, her face lit by the glow of the campfire. Jack turned the photo over, his heart pounding. On the back, written in smeared ink, were the words, "She's ours now." Jack stared at the Polaroid, the words on the back burning into his mind. "She's ours now." His hands trembled as he handed the photo to Emma, whose eyes widened in horror. Chris leaned in, his face pale as he read the words. "What the hell is this?" Chris demanded, his voice tight. "Who's doing this?" Jack shook his head. "I don't know, but someone's out here, watching us." "Someone? That wasn't a someone we saw climbing out of that sinkhole," Chris snapped. "And now Beth is—" He cut himself off, unable to finish the thought. Emma took a deep, shuddering breath. "We can't stay out here. We need to go back to camp, grab our gear, and get out of this forest." Jack glanced back the way they'd come, dread pooling in his stomach. The trees seemed to press closer now, the darkness between them impenetrable. "What if they're watching the camp?" Emma swallowed hard. "We'll have to risk it. We can't stay out here without supplies." Reluctantly, the group began retracing their steps. Jack led the way, gripping his knife tightly. Emma followed close behind, clutching her flashlight, while Chris brought up the rear, still holding the smoldering branch. The forest was deathly quiet. No chirping insects, no rustling leaves, just the sound of their own footsteps crunching over dirt and fallen twigs. Every so often Jack's flashlight would catch movement in the shadows, but whenever he focused the beam, there was nothing there. After what felt like hours, they reached the edge of the clearing where their camp lay. Jack signaled for the others to stop and crouched low, scanning the area with his flashlight. The fire pit was cold now, the tents dark and undisturbed, but something was wrong. "Do you see that?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack followed her gaze to the center of the clearing. A figure was standing there, its back to them. It was tall and thin, its posture unnaturally rigid. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge their presence, just stood there, facing Beth's tent. Chris cursed under his breath. "What the hell is that?" Jack motioned for them to stay put and crept forward, his flashlight aimed at the ground to avoid drawing attention. As he got closer, his breath caught in his throat. The figure wasn't wearing clothes. Its skin was pale and mottled, stretched too tightly over an emaciated frame. Its head tilted slightly, as if listening for something. Jack froze, his heart pounding in his ears. Slowly he raised the flashlight and aimed the beam at the figure. It turned. Its face was hollow, its eyes sunk in black pits that seemed to drink in the light. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. Jack stumbled back, his flashlight shaking in his hand. "Run!" he shouted, his voice cracking. The figure lunged toward him with inhuman speed, its limbs moving unnaturally as it closed the distance. Jack bolted, the others screaming as they followed. The forest exploded with noise, branches snapping, leaves crunching, their panicked breaths mixing with guttural, inhuman sounds from behind. They ran blindly, the flashlight beams bouncing wildly. The creature was fast, its heavy, uneven footsteps closing the gap no matter how fast they ran. Jack veered off the trail, crashing through the underbrush in a desperate attempt to lose it. Emma and Chris followed, their terrified cries echoing in the darkness. Suddenly, the ground dropped away beneath Jack's feet. He tumbled down a steep incline, his body slamming into rocks and tree roots before coming to a stop at the bottom. Pain shot through his ribs, but he forced himself to his feet, wincing. His flashlight was gone, leaving him in near-total darkness. "Emma, Chris," he called, his voice hoarse. No answer. Above him, the forest was still. The sounds of pursuit had stopped, leaving only the eerie silence. Jack's heart pounded as he strained to listen, every nerve in his body on edge. Then, faintly, he heard it. A whisper. "Jack?" It wasn't Emma. It wasn't Chris. It was Beth. Jack froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The voice, it was Beth's, but distorted, stretched thin like it had been dragged through static. His breath caught as he scanned the darkness around him. The incline he'd tumbled down was steep, the underbrush dense and tangled. If Beth was down here, how had she gotten there, and why did her voice sound so wrong? "Beth?" Jack called, his voice trembling. "Where are you?" The forest didn't answer. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves. Jack's hands shook as he patted his pockets, searching for his flashlight. But it was gone. He cursed under his breath and took a cautious step forward, his knife gripped tightly in his hand. Then he heard it again. "Jack?" This time the voice was closer, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. Jack's stomach churned. It wasn't just the tone that was wrong, it was the cadence. Beth had a distinct way of speaking, a rhythm to her words that wasn't there now. This voice was a parody of hers, like an echo that had learned to mimic but didn't understand. "Beth, if that's you, say something else," Jack demanded, his voice louder now, tinged with desperation. Silence, then a response. "Something else." Jack's blood ran cold. The words were hers, but the tone was all wrong, hollow and mocking. He stumbled back, his foot catching on a root. He barely managed to stay upright, his eyes darting frantically through the trees. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice cracking. A soft laugh echoed through the woods, low and guttural. It wasn't Beth's laugh. It wasn't human. Jack turned and ran, his feet slipping on the uneven ground as he clawed his way up the incline. His lungs burned, his muscles screaming in protest, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. That thing, whatever it was, wasn't Beth, and it was toying with him. As he reached the top of the incline, he nearly collided with Emma and Chris. They were out of breath, their faces pale and streaked with dirt. "Jack!" Emma gasped, grabbing his arm. "Are you okay? We heard you screaming." "There's something down there," Jack said, his voice frantic. It sounded like Beth, but it wasn't her. It was copying her. Chris's eyes widened. "Copying her? What the hell does that mean?" "I don't know," Jack admitted, his voice shaking, "but we need to keep moving. It's close." Emma nodded, her grip on Jack's arm tightening. "Which way?" Jack glanced around, trying to get his bearings. The forest looked the same in every direction, a maze of shadows and twisted trees. Then he spotted a faint light in the distance, flickering through the trees like a will-o'-the-wisp. "There," Jack said, pointing. "It's light. Maybe another trail or a campsite." "Or another trap," Chris muttered. But he followed as Jack and Emma began moving toward the light. The light grew brighter as they approached, resolving into the glow of a campfire. Relief surged through Jack, but it was quickly replaced by unease. The fire burned in a small clearing, but there were no people, no tents, no signs of a campsite, just the fire, crackling merrily in the center of an otherwise empty space. "What is this?" Emma whispered, stepping closer. Chris grabbed her arm. "Don't go near it." Jack scanned the clearing, his grip on the knife tightening. "Someone's here. They have to be." Then he saw them. Polaroids, dozens of them, scattered around the fire. Jack's chest tightened as he knelt to pick one up. It was Beth, her face frozen in a smile, standing at the edge of the forest. He grabbed another. This one showed Chris leaning against a tree with a wary expression. A third photo sent a chill down Jack's spine. It was of him, taken only moments ago, as he crouched beside the fire. "Jack," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was pointing to the opposite side of the clearing. A figure stood just beyond the firelight, its pale, emaciated form hunched and unnatural, its head tilted, those sunken black eyes fixed on Jack. Then it smiled, a grotesque grin that stretched far too wide. And it spoke. "Jack?" The voice wasn't Beth's anymore. It wasn't anyone's. It was an amalgamation of sounds, distorted and fractured, like a broken radio trying to tune itself. Jack stumbled back, dragging Emma and Chris with him. The creature took a step forward, its movements jerky and wrong like a marionette controlled by clumsy hands. Its grin widened as it reached out, long fingers clawing at the air. "Run!" Jack shouted, his voice raw. They turned and fled, the creature's laughter following them into the woods. Branches whipped against Jack's face as he sprinted through the forest, his breath ragged and his legs screaming in protest. Emma was just ahead, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly through the darkness. Chris trailed behind, his footfalls heavy and uneven. The creature's laughter followed them, an unnatural fractured sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jack didn't dare look back. He could hear it moving, its jerky, deliberate steps tearing through the underbrush, growing louder and louder. "Faster!" Jack yelled, his voice hoarse. Emma turned abruptly, veering onto a faint game trail that snaked between dense clusters of trees. Jack followed without hesitation, the narrow path forcing them into a single file. The terrain grew steeper, and the underbrush thickened, clawing at their clothes and slowing their pace. Behind them, the laughter stopped. Jack skidded to a halt, his chest heaving as he strained to listen. The forest was silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Emma and Chris stopped too, their wide eyes darting around the shadows. "Do you hear it?" Emma whispered. Jack shook his head. The absence of sound was worse than the laughter. It meant the creature was hunting silently now, moving through the forest like a phantom. His grip on the knife tightened, the handle slick with sweat. "What do we do?" Chris asked, his voice low and frantic. Jack scanned the forest, his mind racing. "We keep moving. If we stay still, it'll find us." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Which way?" Jack pointed uphill. The incline was steep, but it offered a vantage point, a chance to see the creature coming. They climbed in silence, the forest closing in around them. The air felt heavier here, colder, as if the woods themselves were alive and hostile. At the top of the ridge they stopped to catch their breath. The view was limited, the forest stretching endlessly in every direction. Jack glanced at Emma and Chris, their faces pale and streaked with dirt. "We can't just keep running," Emma said, her voice trembling. "It's faster than us, smarter than us. We need a plan." Jack's mind raced. The creature seemed to thrive on fear, toying with them like a predator enjoying the hunt. It had lured Beth away, left the Polaroids, and driven them into the woods. But why? What did it want? Then it hit him. The sinkhole. "That thing came from the sinkhole," Jack said, his voice urgent. "It was protecting it. What if that's its territory? What if we lure it back there?" Chris stared at him. "Lure it back? Are you insane? That thing will kill us." "It's already hunting us," Jack shot back. "At least this way we have a chance. The sinkhole is deep. If we can get it to fall in, maybe we can trap it." Emma's brow furrowed. "How do we get it to follow us?" Jack held up one of the Polaroids he'd grabbed from the fire. "It's obsessed with us. It's been watching us, stalking us. If it sees us heading back to the sinkhole, it'll come after us." Chris looked unconvinced, but Emma nodded. "It's worth a shot. We can't keep running forever." Reluctantly, Chris agreed, and the group began making their way downhill, moving quickly but carefully. Jack led the way, keeping his flashlight low to avoid drawing attention. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees towering like sentinels. As they neared the sinkhole, the air grew colder, the smell of decay wafting on the breeze. Jack's stomach churned as they entered the clearing. The sinkhole yawned before them, a black void filled with the detritus of countless victims. They stopped at the edge, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Jack scanned the forest, his heart pounding. The creature wasn't far. He could feel its presence, a malevolent force lurking just out of sight. Then, from the shadows, it emerged. The creature stepped into the clearing, its pale, emaciated form illuminated by the moonlight. Its eyes were black voids, its grin impossibly wide. It moved with a predatory grace, its head tilting as it studied them. Jack raised the Polaroid. "You want us?" he shouted. "Come and get us!" The creature's grin widened, and it let out a low, guttural laugh. Then it charged. Jack and the others darted to the sides of the sinkhole, their footsteps skidding on the loose dirt. The creature moved faster than Jack expected, closing the distance with terrifying speed. It lunged for him, but he rolled out of the way, its claws swiping inches from his face. "Over here!" Emma shouted, waving her flashlight to draw its attention. The creature snarled and turned toward her, its movements jerky and unnatural. Emma backed away, leading it toward the edge of the sinkhole. At the last second, she dove to the side. The creature couldn't stop in time. It teetered on the edge, its claws scrabbling at the dirt as it tried to regain its footing. Jack didn't hesitate. He rushed forward and shoved it with all his strength, sending it tumbling into the void. The creature let out a bone-chilling scream as it fell, its voice echoing through the forest. Then there was silence. The group stood at the edge, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The sinkhole was still now, the darkness swallowing the creature whole. "Did we—" Chris began, but he couldn't finish. "I think we did," Jack said, though his voice lacked conviction. Emma stepped back, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "Let's get out of here now." The three of them didn't speak as they fled the sinkhole, the oppressive forest pressing in on all sides. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf sent a jolt of fear through them, but the creature's piercing cries had ceased, replaced by an unnatural silence. The only sound was their ragged breathing and the crunch of their footsteps on the forest floor. The first glimmers of dawn filtered through the trees as they finally stumbled back into their campsite. It felt like a lifetime ago that they had laughed around the campfire, their biggest worry being who had packed the marshmallows. Now the clearing was a desolate reminder of what they had lost. Beth was gone, and the remaining three were shadows of the people who had started this trip. Emma collapsed onto a log, her head in her hands. Chris stood near the cold fire pit, his face pale and drawn. Jack remained on the edge of the clearing, staring back at the trail they had emerged from, half expecting to see the creature lurching after them. "We need to go," Emma said, her voice breaking the silence. "As soon as possible, before anything else happens." Jack nodded. "Let's pack what we can and leave. We'll go straight back to the car and get help." Chris didn't move. He was staring at something near the edge of the clearing. "Guys," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is that?" Jack and Emma turned, their stomachs sinking. At first it looked like just another Polaroid lying face up in the dirt. But as Jack approached it, his heart pounded in his chest. It was a picture of the three of them, taken from above, as they stood at the edge of the sinkhole. "That's impossible," Emma said, her voice trembling. How?" Jack picked up the Polaroid, his hands shaking. There was something written on the back in the same smeared ink as before. "Not yet." The air seemed to grow colder. The shadows of the trees stretched unnaturally long, creeping toward them like fingers. Jack's mind raced. The creature couldn't have survived the fall. Could it? "We have to go," he said, his voice tight. "Now." The group scrambled to pack their gear, abandoning anything that wasn't essential. The clearing seemed to darken with each passing second, the forest closing in around them. Jack led the way, his knife in hand, as they started down the trail toward the car. The journey was grueling, every sound amplified by their heightened senses. But as they pushed forward, the forest began to thin. The light grew brighter, and Jack felt the first stirrings of hope. Then he heard it. A laugh, low and guttural, rising from somewhere deep in the forest. Jack froze, his blood turning to ice. Emma and Chris stopped too, their faces pale with terror. "It's still out there," Chris whispered, his voice shaking. "No," Jack said, his voice firm. "It's not following us, it's letting us go." Emma frowned. Why would it do that? Jack didn't answer. He didn't want to admit what he was thinking, that they hadn't escaped, not really. The creature had let them leave because it wanted them to, because it wanted to watch them suffer. When they finally reached the car, they threw their gear inside and climbed in, slamming the doors shut. Jack started the engine, the sound breaking the suffocating silence. As they sped down the dirt road, the forest seemed to watch them, its dark eyes hidden in the shadows. It wasn't until they reached the highway that Jack allowed himself to breathe, but even as the miles stretched between them and the forest, he couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't left it behind. In his pocket, the Polaroid burned like a brand, a constant reminder of the message scrawled on its back. Not yet. The creature wasn't finished with them, and deep down Jack knew it never would be.